When someone is in the early stages of developing an identity, a system of beliefs through which to interpret the world, they have a tendency to gravitate towards extreme presentations of ideology, ideas which radically shake their worldview and recontextualize their understanding of everything they thought they knew. This was the experience I had watching Earth Maiden Arjuna as a 16-year-old in early 2008. I'd heard of the show, which was released in 2004, because of articles in Anime Insider and Animerica magazines, including an interview with series creator Shoji Kawamori about his reasons for creating it. Shoji Kawamori is a household name among veteran anime obsessives as the creator of the seminal soap opera in space backed by Beautiful Battle's Superdimensional Fortress Macross, which has continued as a franchise at least up into the 2010s. More important to most Americans, though, is probably his work as a mechanical designer not only on plenty of anime, but on the original Transformers, including the design of Optimus Goddamn Prime. The best way I can describe Shoji Kawamori is that he must have looked at Mobile Suit Gundam, felt like he totally is a new type, and decided to share his new type visions with the world. Arjuna is in many ways a celebration of extremely lateral, extremely impressionistic thought. It starts with, and often falls back into, fast montages of high-impact images which put the themes into your head immediately of environmental decay, factory farming, use of pesticides in food, and man's ugly relationship with nature in general. On the surface level, it's primarily an environmentalist show, but it has bigger fish to fry than just the problems facing our society. It wants to address the fundamental misunderstandings we all have about our place in the world which cause us to destroy it this way in the first place. The Anime Insider article had pitched Arjuna as an artsy take on a magical girl show, as the Japanese title Chikyu Shoujo Arjuna implies, though I think this gimmick didn't end up coming through as much in the final product as might have been intended. While it's true that the show is largely episodic, focusing on one social issue at a time, and the protagonist is a transforming hero protecting her friends and the world, the show goes so much heavier on its messaging than almost any other anime I've seen, and is so dedicated to subverting any kind of traditional storytelling ideas as per the nature of its message, that it's hard to even compare to a regular magical girl show. Kawamori based the themes of Arjuna on a trip he took to India, which gave him new perspective on some of the things which he felt Japanese culture would be wise to adapt. There is plenty of Hindu religious symbolism in the show's design, starting obviously with its title and the presence of Mecha Shiva, but for the most part, I think it's fair to say that Kawamori connects his understanding of Indian culture into Far Eastern ideas of Taoism, creating a vaguely cross-cultural sense of spiritualism in the story. It's pretty hilarious to watch if you're familiar with spirit science as well, as there is explicit representation of chakras, something resembling the Kundalini and the starship, and a pretty clear analog of the psychic powers the main characters have to different levels of Christ consciousness. None of this is even remotely explained in the show, by the way, it's just the power of Earth, I guess. What Arjuna is about on the whole is the idea that planet Earth is essentially a single superorganism, and that our inability to recognize this allows us to treat ourselves as something other, not only from the planet but from one another as human beings. It comments on how difficult it is to live in an awakened way in a world where most people will put convenience and ease of understanding over challenging themselves to make things better. It explores the many ways that humanity has failed itself by taking a mass production approach to not just food, but education, power generation, and even human life, causing us to disconnect ourselves from the world in order to justify knowingly poisoning it to live our own lives faster. Each episode focuses on another issue, and many of the show's takes are pretty extreme and pretty surprising. Hardcore liberals getting geared up to hear some preachin' might be stayed to know there's essentially a whole anti-abortion episode, but it's way more than that because it's also an anti-birth in hospitals period episode. The character presented as most heroic in the show is an old man that lives out in the woods by himself and allows bugs to eat his crops because he has more than he needs and the bugs make the environment healthier to have there. This was the element of Arjuna which spoke to me the most originally because I really do consider this to be the most noble way to live. Like, in my mind, every second I spend having more carbon footprint than this guy is a second I have to make up for by somehow improving the world in kind. And I have not succeeded at that in any way, shape, or form in the 12 years since I last watched this show. It really was heartening, though, especially when I was a depressed teenager desperate for an excuse to run away from home. When I saw Juna struggling in the mountains and wondering how all the animals were able to figure out what they could eat just on instinct, I realized that I probably shouldn't try to go live in the forest by myself. But then when I saw the old dude, I realized that as long as I learned how to do shit, I could always fall back on that way of life, and probably feel better about myself than I ever will making YouTube videos for fame and money. After Juna and her boyfriend meet the mountain monk and return back to normal life, they both immediately get sick from eating American burger. That's right, there's a big old virus making its way through the Japanese population, and Arjuna has to go into her boyfriend's body and heal his gut biome so that he has the antibodies to fight the virus himself. Probably cured his autism while she was in there. When the coronavirus was first breaking America, it just so happened that I was in the middle of RadCon 4, where I was surrounded by other guys who'd flown in from around the country and even from London. We had a meetup with like 40 people, several of whom reported being sick afterwards and most likely having briefly contracted the corona. But me? All I took was one nasty shit and the rest was history. Why? Because I take my fucking multis! Arjuna is a pretty cool show. It's got one of the few soundtracks that I own and have regularly listened to over the years, composed by Yoko Kanno and blending dramatic orchestral sounds and tribal spiritual chants with religious overtones in a way that she always naturally provides. It's yet another complete shift into a sound palette and genre totally different from anything she's known for, and which she completely nails, even if it's nowhere near as expansive as the many longer shows she's scored. I think she composed the OP expecting the show to materialize as more of a Mahou Shoujo thing, because it didn't end up fitting the tone all that well, which is probably why it only gets played twice in the whole show. Arjuna is pumped full of cool-ass spiritual imagery and shit for yin-yang net surfer hippie clusterpunks like me, and has a bunch of episodes and themes that I strongly agree with, like the one that shits on the education system with beautiful indulgence, or the overall idea that words are authoritarian and evil and that building our whole society on them was a huge fucking mistake, but we'll save that for another Otagonzo tape. I won't say that Arjuna is consistently great, or that I think most people will agree with all of its sentiments and pretensions, even if its root message is one of utmost legitimate importance, regardless of how you manifest your understanding of it. For me, it intensified my feeling of place within the superstructure of the world around me, and was one of my first experiences with something akin to ego death, which is definitely mission accomplished on Kawamori's part, even if I had to watch the show again to even fully comprehend how the ending recontextualized the show in a way that I have to imagine a version of me who already understood the world the way that I do now would have easily gotten the first time. It's also just a joy to me to see a show that's so absolutely brazen about its messaging, aesthetics, and narrative arc, even if I think it ultimately could have optimized the space in its episodes better to tighten its messaging, add more detail to its relatively unmemorable normie characters and obnoxiously obtuse new-type kids, and given way more space for the climax to have some dramatic weight. Nonetheless, it's a show that I can easily recommend because even if the whole thing pissed you off and you disagreed with it and hated every minute of it, I'd still rather I tried to get you to understand my yin-yang shit than not. Oh wait, this video's not over yet. This is the first Otagonzo tape that I wrote, number 1.1. I honestly was not enthusiastic enough about it to go through with creating it, mostly because I just wanted to rewatch Arjuna just incidentally with May, and we rewatched it, I enjoyed it, I felt like I could say something about it, and why not? I just rewatched it, I have the footage, let me just write something real quick. And like, this idea of how my approach to the Otagonzo tapes would be, of just like watching anime and talking about it right away, and just like writing whatever I have to say, would become like something that I'd go forward with. But this particular script is just such a, like, I don't know, it feels forced to me in that, like, while I do say, you know, worthwhile things about the show, it's a decent recommendation video. I just didn't feel like my heart was in it in the way that it was with the other Otagonzo tapes, which is why I skipped it and went straight to number 2.1. as you may know if you saw the thumbnails. So yeah, this is one of the ones that I just decided I'm not going to go through with creating it, but I'm still going to release it in script form so that you can all hear it and the content can exist in some form, because I really just don't think it's worth the effort of going through with editing it. But you know, if somebody else wants to edit it and release it that way, go ahead. You know, you have the audio, just go ahead and slap your own video on there. Watch Arjuna. If you feel like you need to spread knowledge of it, but you can't write a script and you like this one, go for it. Otherwise, it'll just have to stay this way.